Picture this: Westminster Palace, April 9, 1483. The stench of rotting flesh permeates the royal bedchamber despite servants burning frankincense every hour. You smell sweetness-masking decay, hear labored breathing through heavy oak doors. Edward IV, towering, handsome, just for 40 years old, lies dying surrounded by physicians whispering in Latin about lesions they dare not name aloud. Edward IV reigns as England's most sexually voracious monarch from 1461 to 1483. Court chroniclers openly call him the Lusty King, documenting countless mistresses from London merchant wives to noble ladies. His legendary beauty serves as political currency, 6'4", golden-haired, charming beyond measure. His infidelities are celebrated as proof of masculine vitality. He fathers at least 10 illegitimate children alongside his legitimate heirs. But here's what they didn't tell you. Those fishing expeditions chroniclers mention weren't about catching fish. Medieval slang uses fishing to describe sexual conquests, and Edward fished voraciously. According to historian Marilyn Salmon's research in the Ricardian, the symptoms match tertiary syphilis perfectly. Skin eruptions spreading from groin to torso, neurological deterioration, sudden collapse. Official records call it sudden illness, but evidence suggests systemic treponemal disease. You watch his massive frame convulse on silk sheets soaked with fever sweat. Pustules weep clear fluid onto expensive bedding embroidered with the Yorkist sun. His speech slurs as spirochetes devour his brain tissue. The archbishop administers last rites while backing away from the smell of gangrenous tissue. Edward cries out for Jane Shore, his favorite mistress, then for his wife Elizabeth, his fragmenting mind grasping at memories. You hear the death rattle at approximately 2 in the afternoon, a sound like drowning in air. His eyes remain open, vacant, staring at ceiling frescoes. The physicians note acute fever of short duration in official records, carefully avoiding any mention of the true cause, festering in his loins for years. What historians won't mention is the smoking gun. Perkin Warbeck exhibited an eye-lacking luster textbook interstitial keratitis from congenital syphilis passed from father to child. The disease infected his bloodline. Notice how this establishes our pattern: sexual excess leading to biological death, with courts protecting royal reputation. Imagine discovering the truth about April 7, 1498 at Château d'Amboise. You're examining court records revealing what followed that minor bump. The young king rushed through dim corridors to watch tennis, struck his forehead on a stone lintel, laughed it off, watched the match for 2 hours, then collapsed into seizures that killed him 9 hours later on a pile of straw. Charles VIII embodies medieval France's contradictions. Deeply pious yet sexually insatiable, physically unprepossessing yet politically ambitious. His Italian campaigns from 1494 to 1498 conquer Naples and reshape European politics. According to Florentine diplomat Francesco Guicciardini's account, Charles's army contracts the Great Pox, sweeping Italian cities. The king personally samples Naples's courtesans with legendary enthusiasm, returning triumphant with military glory and something invisible, deadly, eating through his nervous system. What the textbooks leave out is what modern medical analysis reveals. Dr. Philippe Charlier's forensic study demolishes the official narrative. A low-energy head bump cannot kill a healthy 27-year-old man. The real diagnosis: status epilepticus, secondary to neurosyphilis. By April 1498, tertiary syphilis has riddled Charles's brain with spirocheta damage, creating perfect conditions for catastrophic neurological failure. That bump triggered seizures in a brain already compromised. 2 hours after impact, you see Charles collapse mid-tennis match at approximately 4 in the afternoon. Servants catch his seizing body, lowering him onto hastily gathered straw. Urine soaks his velvet hose as his bladder releases. His eyes roll back, showing only whites bloodshot with burst capillaries. Foam bubbles from his mouth, pink tinged with blood from a bitten tongue. The grand mal seizure continues for 7 agonizing minutes, back arching impossibly. Muscles rigid as iron bars, fingers clawed. You smell excrement, sweat, the metallic tang of blood pooling under his head. No physician comes for 3 hours because courtiers recognize epileptic symptoms as demonic possession. When doctors finally arrive, Charles lies comatose on soiled straw. He dies at 11 that night without regaining consciousness, hidden for centuries. Charles's court showed feverish unease and delayed calling physicians, revealing they recognized symptoms associated with divine punishment. The delay cost him any chance of survival. Notice how this parallels Edward IV's biological punishment, both dying from venereal disease disguised as sudden illness. You're standing outside Berkeley Castle on September 21st, 1327, smelling rain on stone and something else, the aftermath of violence. Guards whisper nervously, crossing themselves. The deposed king's screams have stopped. You might think the famous red-hot poker story is true, generations believed it. But actually, that gruesome tale appears nowhere in contemporary sources. Edward II rules England from 1307 to 1327 through obsessive attachments to male favorites. First Piers Gaveston, then Hugh Despencer the Younger dominate his emotional and political life. These relationships consume Edward's political capital. He lavishes titles, lands, power on his favorites, while alienating the baronage and Queen Isabella of France. According to the Vita Edwardi Secundi, Edward's relationship with Gaveston generates excessive and immoderate affection. But here's the disturbing part. Historian Ian Mortimer's research proves the poker myth only emerges after 1330. No contemporary source mentions anal penetration with heated iron. The fabricated method serves dual purposes. It provides plausible deniability, no external wounds, suggesting natural death while functioning as moral propaganda, portraying death as divine punishment for alleged sodomy. The real murder likely involves suffocation or internal beating, leaving minimal visible marks. The actual death unfolds in darkness around midnight. You imagine multiple men entering Edward's cell. The former king, held down by 4 guards, feels pillows pressed over his face with crushing force. He thrashes against leather restraints, lungs burning for air that won't come. You hear muffled cries against fabric, desperate thrashing growing weaker over 3 agonizing minutes as oxygen starvation damages his brain. Perhaps they use the table method, placing a heavy oak table on his chest, men sitting atop it, slowly crushing breath from his lungs. This technique leaves almost no visible marks. You smell fierce sweat of killers and victim in that enclosed stone room. When it's done, they arrange the body peacefully on the bed. The body displays no external trauma when examined exactly as the assassins planned. What makes this worse? The poker myth brilliantly served Isabella and Mortimer's regime by transforming political assassination into moral judgment. The sexual narrative justified regicide as righteous punishment. Notice how sexual narrative legitimizes murder. It transforms political killing into acceptable moral cleansing. Picture this. Blacklow Hill, Warwickshire, June 19, 1312. Approximately 9 in the morning. Morning dew soaks through Piers Gaveston's knees as he kneels in mud. Hemp rope cuts into his wrists, bound behind his back. The Earl of Warwick stands 10 paces distant, satisfaction evident on his weathered face. 2 professional executioners sharpen their blade on a whetstone, the scraping sound cutting through birdsong. Gaveston embodies everything English nobility despises. A foreign Gascon upstart elevated purely through royal favor. Edward II's devotion to him is absolute, public, politically disastrous. The king grants Gaveston the earldom of Cornwall on August 6, 1307, traditionally reserved for royal princes, plus vast estates worth £4,000 annually. According to the Vita Edwardi Secundi, Gaveston mocks powerful barons with insulting nicknames. Joseph the Jew for the Earl of Pembroke, the Black Dog of Arden for Warwick himself. What you're about to learn reveals systematic destruction. The Lords Ordainers force Edward to exile Gaveston 3 times, November 1307, June 1308, and November 1311. 3 times the king recalls him, unable to govern without his favorites' presence. Each return enrages nobility further. On May 19, 1312, he surrenders to the Earl of Pembroke under sacred oath of safe conduct. Warwick violates that oath, seizing Gaveston on June 10th, conducting this extrajudicial execution without trial, without royal consent, without legal authority whatsoever. The blade rises at 9:17, catching morning sunlight. Gaveston's head tilts back. Exposing his neck, you see the pulse beating rapidly beneath skin slick with nervous sweat. The executioner swings with practiced force. The first blow doesn't sever completely. You hear Gaveston gurgle wetly, see blood fountain 3 feet onto grass and wildflowers, smell copper and released bowels. His body convulses involuntarily. The executioner adjusts his angle, swings again at 9:18. This time the head separates cleanly with a sound like a butcher's cleaver, through gristle rolling slightly down the incline before stopping against limestone rock. Gaveston's body remains kneeling for perhaps 3 seconds before toppling sideways. Blood pools in the grass. Hidden in the archives, Edward II was forced to accept his favorite's murder, powerless to avenge it without triggering civil war. The Annales Paulini records the king's grief as inconsolable for months. Notice how this establishes a pattern. Those gaining power through intimacy with monarchs are systematically eliminated by threatened elites. Imagine discovering the detailed execution protocol written for November 24, 1326, in Hereford Queen Isabella's personal orders for Hugh Despencer the Younger's death. Every element choreographed for maximum symbolic destruction. Public nudity except for a crown of nettles, biblical verses condemning sodomy written on his skin in charcoal, castration before disembowelment, specific placement of body parts for public display. This isn't justice, it's theater. Despencer wields power that makes Gaveston's influence look restrained. As Edward II's chamberlain villain and apparent lover, he accumulates vast estates through rapacious land grabbing, manipulates royal justice for personal enrichment, effectively rules England as tyrant from behind the throne. According to the Annales Paulini, his greed and the king's absolute devotion drive Queen Isabella into open rebellion. She forms an alliance with her lover Roger Mortimer, invading England in September 1326. What the textbooks leave out is the deliberate symbolism orchestrated by Isabella herself. When she and Mortimer capture Despenser at Bristol on November 16th, they need to justify not just deposing a king, but destroying the entire regime. The solution: transform Despenser's execution into ritualized cleansing of sexual corruption. Modern analysis of the Brut Chronicle reveals every element was planned days in advance. The route maximizing public exposure, the platform height ensuring visibility, the sequence of mutilations designed to last maximum time while keeping him conscious. Isabella personally approves the protocol. You watch Hereford Marketplace November 24th, approximately 10 in the morning. They strip Despenser naked before thousands, drag him through streets as crowds throw excrement. Verses from Leviticus condemning sodomy are written across his chest. A brazier burns below the 50-foot scaffold, heating instruments to red hot. First, at 10:15, they castrate him with a glowing blade, the smell of searing flesh mixing with his screams. The executioner holds his severed genitals high before throwing them into flames. Despenser's screams transcend language, pure animal agony. You smell burning flesh, blood, singed hair. Then at 10:23, they slice his abdomen open while he's fully conscious, pulling intestines out slowly, feeding them into the fire while he watches his own body being dismantled. This continues for 27 agonizing minutes before they show mercy at 10:42, beheading him. What historians won't mention: contemporary accounts. Note Isabella showed no emotion during the spectacle. The sexual elements transform execution into moral condemnation. Notice how this inverts Edward II's private suffocation. Both use sexual narrative to justify murder. You're standing in Chateau Gaillard's circular tower, August 14th, 1315, at approximately midnight. Through 12-foot thick stone walls, you hear the sign flowing far below the cliff. Margaret of Burgundy, Queen Consort of France, convicted adulteress, national disgrace, lies on moldy straw and freezing darkness. Her head is shorn to stubble, her court gowns replaced with rough wool. She's been imprisoned here since April 30, 1314. Tonight, men enter with specific orders. Margaret represents the apex of French royal matrimony. Beautiful, cultured daughter of Duke Robert II of Burgundy, married to Louis, heir to France's throne. She manages court politics gracefully, embodies everything a future queen should be. Then the Tour de Nesle affair shatters everything. Accused of adultery with Knight Philippe d'Aulnay, she's tried before the Paris Parlement on April 19, 1314. According to Jean de Saint-Victor's Memoriale Historiarum, the d'Aulnay brothers confess under torture, are castrated, flayed alive, beheaded. But here's the disturbing part. Margaret's survival becomes politically intolerable when Louis X ascends the throne. November 29, 1314. She remains technically his wife, legally queen consort, a living obstacle. Louis desperately needs a legitimate male heir, but obtaining papal annulment takes time. Modern analysis by historian Alain Desmourgues reveals the cold calculation. Margaret's life prevents remarriage. Her death solves the dynastic crisis instantly. The cell door opens around midnight. Margaret has perhaps expected this since Louis's coronation. The men don't speak, there's nothing to say, no pretense of legality. You watch them approach with a hemp cord, the rough fibers visible even in dim torchlight. Perhaps she prays, perhaps she screams, but these walls are 12 feet thick, and guards have been paid for silence. They loop the cord around her throat from behind, twisting with practiced efficiency. You hear her heels drumming stone floor in involuntary spasms, her nails scraping walls desperately, wet gasping that gradually weakens over 4 agonizing minutes. Her body convulses as oxygen starvation triggers seizures, bladder and bowels releasing at 12:04. When the thrashing stops at 12:06, they hold the cord tighter for another 90 seconds. The body is hastily buried August 15th in an unmarked grave. What makes this worse? Margaret dies within 8 months of Louis's coronation. Louis marries Clementia of Hungary by August 19th, 5 days after Margaret's convenient death. Notice how female adultery receives immediate fatal punishment, while male promiscuity goes unpunished until disease extracts biological cost. Picture this: Maubuisson Abbey, May 1326. Blanche of Burgundy takes her final breaths in a simple nun's cell. 12 years after conviction in the Tour de Nesle affair. She's only 32, but looks 60 decades of imprisonment have transformed her. You smell the consumption ravaging her lungs, sweet sick odor of advanced tuberculosis. Her skin is translucent, veins visible like blue rivers. Each breath is a wet rattle. Blanche marries Charles, Count of La Marche, third son of Philip IV in 1308. Beautiful and vivacious, she becomes entangled in the Tour de Nesle scandal, alongside sister-in-law Margaret. According to the Grandes Chroniques de France, she's accused of adultery with Knight Gautier d'Aulnay, tried April 19, 1314, convicted of high treason through sexual betrayal. She's imprisoned at Chateau Gaillard in conditions designed to break body and spirit. Underground cell, minimal food, no heat. What you're about to learn reveals extended cruelty. When Charles unexpectedly becomes King Charles IV on January 3, 1322, he refuses release. Instead, he uses royal authority to secure papal annulment, erasing their marriage but keeping her imprisoned. Eventually, she's transferred to Maubuisson Abbey, technically free, but confined to religious life. The 8 years in Chateau Gaillard's dungeons have destroyed her health irreparably. Contemporary physicians' notes describe her lungs as broken from years spent underground. You watch her struggle for each breath. The tuberculosis makes each inhalation a wet rattle, fluid drowning her from inside. Her attendant nuns whisper prayers, but Blanche's eyes are distant, perhaps remembering glittering court life before everything collapsed. You see bloody sputum she coughs into linen cloths that nuns burn immediately. There's no violence here, no murderer's hand, just slow biological consequences of years in damp cells breathing fetid air, her body ground down until any infection becomes fatal. The final moments come in May 1326. Her breathing simply stops, her body too exhausted to continue fighting. She dies forgotten, unmourned except by the nuns who tended her final days. Hidden for centuries in abbey records, Blanche begged Charles IV for release multiple times after his coronation. He refused every petition, ensuring her confinement until death. Notice how this parallels Margaret's fate, both spending years confined, both dying as ultimate consequence. Picture this: Winchester, October 1st, 959. King Eadwig of England, just 19 years old, ruler for barely 4 years, lies dying of causes nobody records clearly. You smell sickroom herbs, hear monks praying who represent the ecclesiastical faction that destroyed him. The illness remains mysteriously vague, but they're specific about the sin, that legendary coronation feast when the teenage king allegedly abandoned guests for sexual adventures. Eadwig inherits the throne at age 15 on November 23, 955, a boy king caught in vicious ecclesiastical political warfare. His reign begins with a scandal modern historians recognize as deliberate character assassination, the claim that he left his coronation feast for a threesome with Elf-Gifu and her mother. According to the Vita Dunstani, Abbot Dunstan discovers them and drags Eadwig back, a humiliating scene becoming legendary propaganda despite questionable veracity. What the textbooks leave out is how obviously fabricated the scandal was. Historian Anne Williams's research demonstrates the tale bears all hallmarks of sexualized political propaganda engineered by Dunstan's faction. The story serves its purpose. Eadwig exiles Dunstan, but is already fatally damaged. His marriage to Elf-Gifu is annulled in 958 on grounds of consanguinity conveniently discovered only after the scandal circulated. By 957, the kingdom splits, with younger brother Edgar taking control of Mercia and Northumbria. You watch the young king's final hours. Perhaps it's illness, perhaps poison, the sources won't specify. You see a teenager who should be at health's peak instead wasting away, his court fractured by the scandal defining his reign. Maybe he thinks of Elf-Gifu, the wife taken from him by political enemies. The monks praying represent those who manufactured his downfall through sexualized slander that made rebellion appear righteous. When he dies October 1st, 959, just 19 years old, it's a political death manifesting as physical. The chronicles record his death in single sentences, no detail, no ceremony erasure, continuing beyond life. What makes this worse? Whether the coronation incident occurred remains doubtful, but the story's circulation accomplished everything. Exile proved corruption, annulment proved incestuous desires, kingdom division demonstrated divine judgment. Notice how this parallels Edward II's fabricated poker death. Sexual narrative transforms political destruction into moral judgment. The final truth emerges around 1358 somewhere in Scotland. Catherine Mortimer, influential mistress of King David II, is found dead in circumstances chronicles barely record. You're examining what little evidence survives a single line in royal accounts. Expenses for the late Catherine dated approximately 1358. She was nobody by birth. Her power derived entirely from sharing the king's bed. That intimacy made her dangerous to Scottish nobles who saw royal favor blocked. Catherine becomes David II's mistress. after his return from English captivity in October 1357. The king, scarred by 11 years' imprisonment and failed marriage to Joan of England, finds comfort with Catherine. According to the Scotichronicon by Walter Bauer, she gains extraordinary influence at court, advising the king on appointments, possibly influencing patronage decisions. For nobles accustomed to traditional power structures, a royal mistress wielding such authority represents intolerable disorder. But here's the disturbing part. Catherine's influence threatens the entire Scottish political establishment. David II's dependence on her council cuts traditional nobles out of power. The Extracta Evarius Chronicis, Scosi notes Scottish nobility views her as corrupting force. The solution is simple, brutal, and leaves minimal historical trace. Remove her permanently through assassination disguised as accident or natural death. You imagine a conspiracy among jealous nobles. Maybe they invite her to a feast in Edinburgh Castle around March 1358, poison already measured into her cup. You see her raise Rhenish wine to her lips, trusting these noble lords who've shown courtesy at court. The hemlock or nightshade takes effect within an hour. Stomach cramps, paralysis, respiratory failure over 90 agonizing minutes. Or maybe it's more violent, men waiting in her chambers after she leaves the king's bed, hands over her mouth, a pillow pressed down until she stops struggling. You smell her fear, the sweat of assassins working quickly in darkness. The king will rage but cannot prove murder, cannot risk civil war over a low-born mistress however beloved. What historians won't mention: Catherine Mortimer disappears from all records around 1358, with barely a footnote, no death date, no burial record. David II, despite documented fury, never punishes anyone. Notice how this completes our pattern, showing how sexuality becomes the perfect weapon for political destruction. You're standing in Nyköping Castle, December 26, 1302. You might think checking on elderly prisoners is routine guard duty, but today you're discovering a king's corpse. Valdemar Birgersson, once ruler of all Sweden, lies dead in his cell, 52 years old but appearing 80. The affair with his sister-in-law Jutta that produced a bastard child cost him everything: throne, freedom, dignity, hope. He spent 27 years in prison. Valdemar rules Sweden from 1250 to 1275, married to Sophia of Denmark. Initially politically competent, he undermines everything through an affair with Jutta of Denmark, his sister-in-law who has taken religious vows as a postulant nun. According to the Erikskronikon, the relationship produces an illegitimate child in 1273, generating massive ecclesiastical censure. The scandal provides perfect moral justification for rebellion despite underlying political tensions. The real horror was how sexual scandal became a weapon. While underlying tensions existed, taxation disputes between Valdemar and his brother Magnus, power struggles over royal prerogatives, the affair with a nun in training provided unassailable moral justification for rebellion. Magnus exploited the scandal brilliantly, positioning rebellion not as fratricide, but as moral rescue of a kingdom corrupted by its king's sexual sin with a bride of Christ. You imagine those final 27 years, 2 decades of declining health in various prisons. You see an old man in a damp cell at Nyköping, watching seasons change through barred windows, remembering when he commanded the entire Swedish kingdom. You smell the old man's staleness of his cell, unwashed body, unchanged straw bedding, waste bucket in the corner. Maybe he dies in his sleep December 26th, 1302. Maybe from winter illness, his weakened body cannot fight. There's no violence, no drama, just a forgotten old man dying alone on Christmas night, his sexual scandal having transformed him from king to prisoner for nearly 3 decades. What historians won't mention: Valdemar was deposed December 1275, imprisoned immediately, and kept confined until death exactly 27 years. He never regained freedom, never saw his illegitimate child grow up. Notice how this mirrors other deaths, both enduring decades of imprisonment, culminating in death, their slow demise arguably crueler than immediate execution. So what does this pattern tell us about power and vulnerability in medieval courts? 10 deaths across 4 centuries reveal consistent mechanisms: biological consequences of promiscuity, destroying from within; political assassination justified through sexual narrative; and execution designed to destroy intimate influence; and imprisonment protecting dynastic bloodlines. The gendered asymmetry cuts deep. Royal men died from disease their bodies accumulated, or were murdered for choosing controversial companions, while royal women died for sexual transgressions threatening lineage legitimacy. Male favorites died to break their hold on royal affection, while commoners gaining influence through royal beds were assassinated to restore traditional structures. The medieval body politic treated sexuality as inseparable from sovereignty itself. A king's sexual health supposedly reflected his fitness to rule. A queen's sexual fidelity guaranteed bloodline purity, upon which entire dynasties depended. These weren't merely sex deaths. They were political executions draped in moral justification. In medieval courts, sexuality was always political, and political sexuality could always prove fatal.